Hello guys and girls, and welcome to today's video. As you can see here on the screen, the topic that we're going to be talking about today is introduction paragraphs. Last week we started taking some notes over some on-demand vocabulary, and so some of the words that are built into our notes today may look familiar because we did touch on them last week, but moving forward we're just going to dive a little bit deeper. And our focus this week, like I said, is introduction paragraph. A couple of things that I want to point out before we get started here. Number one, you should have already glued your note-taking sheet into your language arts notebook. Most of the things that you have to fill in today are going to be highlighted in orange on my slides, so make sure if you see something in orange that you get it copied down on your note-taking sheet. There is at least one thing that we're going to copy that is not highlighted, but I'll be sure to let you know what that is when we get there. Also, this is an Edpuzzle video, so you can always pause, rewind, rewatch if you need to. There are going to be some questions built into the slides today, and this is going to be for a grade. So again, rewatch, pause, rewind if you need to do that. Also, you guys know that oftentimes on Fridays we take quizzes over things that we talk about throughout the week. So a little hint, wink, wink for you is that you may just possibly, maybe, potentially, perhaps have a quiz on Friday, and part of that quiz may be based off of these notes. Just saying. So make sure you have your pencil ready to go, make sure you have your note-taking sheet ready to go, and we're going to jump in here and get started. This is one of those things that's probably going to look familiar to you because we did talk about it last week. I told you guys that for all the paragraphs of our on-demand, I like to relate them to a shape just to give you a visual so that you know you can relate it to something to help you remember what goes in that part of the on-demand. So this is the one thing that's not highlighted, but I do want you to copy this, and there's a little tiny bit of space up at the top of your note-taking sheet. I believe up at the top it says to draw and label the parts of an introduction paragraph, but I know that it's not a whole lot of space. So if you want to do this like out to the side or up at the top of your paper and draw an arrow to it, please feel free to do that. But go ahead and start drawing what you see on the right hand side of the screen while I talk about this. If our introduction paragraph were a shape, the shape would be an upside down triangle. Remember, it starts off with this long line because the beginning of our introduction is very broad. We're not being super specific when we write our hooks, but as these lines start to come together, we start to get more specific and more narrow on our topic with our background knowledge. And then by the end of the introduction, when we get down here to the point of our triangle, that is the most specific part of our essay. It's the main point that we're writing about, which is our thesis statement. Now, this is one of those moments when you might want to take advantage of pausing the video if you have not had time to copy this yet. So feel free to do that if you need to. If not, we're going to go ahead and move on. Let's talk about the hook first. The hook is the very first sentence of the introduction, which means it's the very first thing that your audience is going to read. Just like when you go fishing, you use a hook to catch a fish. When you are writing, we use a hook to catch our audience's attention. There are 3 different types of hooks that we're going to focus on this year. Our first one is called a rhetorical question. A rhetorical question is a question that you ask your audience that you are not expecting them to actually respond to, but instead it's supposed to be something that is just going to get their brains moving in the direction of what you're going to be writing about. It's a question that you ask them so that they start to think about the topic that you're writing about. Another type of hook that you might use is an interesting fact. Just remember with facts, those cannot be made up. So you can't make up a fact, but if you get a prompt that comes with a passage, you could maybe pull an interesting fact from the text to use as your hook. If there was something that you read that just really stood out to you, you could borrow that and use it as your hook of your essay. The final type of hook that you might use is a short story. The technical term for this is an anecdote, and we actually talked about anecdotes last week when we were going over the different types of evidence. The thing to remember with short stories or anecdotes that makes them a little bit tricky to write is that when I say short story, I mean short story. At the most, we would maybe have 3 sentences for an anecdote, and it can be kind of tricky to tell a story just in 3 sentences, but we're going to look at an example here in just a second. Throughout our notes today, we're going to be using this prompt to look at some different examples, so I'm going to read through this and I would like you to follow along with me. The principal has issued a memo stating that all lockers are to be searched on a weekly basis. Because of the fact that lockers are school property, students cannot refuse the process, the memo states. What is your opinion on this topic? Should LCMS have weekly locker checks? Or is this a violation of student privacy? Support your answer with convincing reasons and evidence. Now, on the next few slides, I'm going to show you different examples of hooks that you might use for this prompt, but this is where some questions are going to come into play, because remember at the beginning I said that there are going to be questions built into our Edpuzzle today. So after I read each hook, you are going to tell me what type of hook it is, and your options are going to be a rhetorical question, a surprising fact, or a short story. Here's number 1. What's more important, student privacy or student safety? Is this a rhetorical question, a surprising fact, or a short story? This is a rhetorical question, and the biggest thing that stands out to me here that lets me know that this is a rhetorical question is that it ends with a question mark. Remember, with a rhetorical question, we're not expecting our audience to answer this, but instead we're hoping that it's going to get their brains moving in the direction of what we're going to be writing about. Here's another type of hook. Imagine this. It's just a regular day of school. You're in 3rd period taking notes in your math class when suddenly sirens begin blaring. Your school is in lockdown. Is this a rhetorical question, a surprising fact, or a short story? This is a short story hook. Remember I said with this type of hook, 3 sentences is the most that you could possibly write, and we do have 3 sentences here. What's kind of nice about this type of hook is that it puts your audience in the story. And so that is usually the goal of a short story hook, is it's trying to get your audience to imagine what it would be like if they were in that scenario. Here's the last type of hook. Did you know that during the 2017-2018 school year, U.S. public schools experienced an estimated 962,300 violent incidents? Is this a rhetorical question, a surprising fact, or a short story? This is a surprising fact. Remember, a fact is something that can be proven true, so if we wanted to, we could look up to confirm if this statistic can be proven true. I found it on an online resource, so I know that it can. And so again, I just want to reiterate that facts cannot be something that you pull from your brain. They have to come from a reliable resource, which this did. Okay, now that we've talked about hooks, let's move on to background information. Background information is 3 to 5 sentences long. Remember, if the hook is only a couple of sentences at the beginning, and then the thesis statement is just 1 sentence at the end of the introduction, that means that the 3 to 5 sentences in the middle for the background is the biggest part of your introduction. And it has an important role to play because there are 2 questions that you need to answer when you're writing your background information. Those 2 questions are, what are you writing about? So what is the topic that you're going to be arguing? And then why is it important? So why should your audience care about that topic? If we were to use this same prompt about locker searches, the background information might look something like this. The principal has issued a memo saying that lockers are going to be searched weekly. He has issued this memo because some illegal substances have been found at school. So you guys are going to notice that I highlighted this in 2 different colors. This first part that's highlighted in blue answers the first question, which is, what am I writing about? I state pretty clearly here that I am writing about locker searches. The part that's in yellow answers the second question, which is why my audience should care. School safety is an important issue and is something everyone should be concerned with because it could mean life or death for young people. It is the responsibility of the school to ensure the safety of students while they are on school property, so it's important that this matter is taken seriously. So I state here in my background information that the reason my audience should care is because everyone should be concerned about school safety. Notice this is quite a bit longer than the hook was. I think there's actually 4 sentences here, which fits perfectly in the 3 to 5 sentences that we would typically expect to see in the background information. All right, last but not least, we have our thesis statement. The thesis statement is the final sentence of the introduction paragraph. And like I told you guys last week, you should think about your thesis statement like the foundation of your essay. If we have a house that has a weak foundation or there's a crack in the foundation, we know that eventually that house is going to collapse. And the same thing is true for your essays. If you have a strong thesis statement, you're going to have a strong essay. Remember, the job of the thesis statement is to state your claim, so it is your opinion on the topic, and then the 2 main points or the 2 main reasons for why you feel that way. The reason that we write thesis statements is because it gives our reader an idea of what our essay is going to be about. It goes at the end of the introduction, and it is only 1 sentence long. We need to make sure that it is a complete sentence, and then we need to make sure that everything else that we write in the essay supports our thesis. Here's some things we want to make sure we avoid when we are writing thesis statements. These are some very common mistakes that I see. First, we do not want to announce our thesis. So what I mean by that is we are not going to say things like, I'm going to tell you about, or in this essay, I am going to argue about. Those are called personal pronouns when we say things like I think, I feel, in my opinion, and when we are writing thesis statements, we want to avoid that. We also have to make sure that our thesis statements are not confusing to our reader. When we are writing on demands, we have to choose one side of the argument and stick to it. We are either for it or we are against it. We can't be riding the fence in the middle. We also want to make sure that our thesis statements are not vague. So vague words are words like good, bad, right, wrong. Those are words that we want to make sure we avoid in our thesis statements. And then finally, our thesis statement should not be a question. It is called a thesis statement, so it should be a statement. Moving forward, last part of our notes today is I'm going to show you some different examples of thesis statements based on our prompt about locker searches, and you are going to tell me what is wrong with that thesis. So these are not correctly written. They all have broken one of those rules that we just talked about. So you're going to tell me which rule is broken. Locker searches are a good idea. What is wrong with this thesis statement? This thesis statement is too vague. It is not specific enough. The first reason is because it uses the word good. And remember, we said we don't really want to use words like good, bad, right, wrong. But also it doesn't list any reasons why this person thinks locker searches are a good idea. So it's not specific enough. How about this one? Locker searches could be good because they keep students safe, but they could also be bad because it's an invasion of privacy. It really just depends on how you look at it. What is wrong with this thesis statement? This particular thesis statement is a little bit confusing because the person who wrote it didn't really choose one side or the other. They gave some reasons why it's good. They gave some reasons why it's bad. But remember, with thesis statements, we need to choose one side of the debate and stick to it. And here's our final one. In this essay, I will address the following topics: student safety, staff safety, and the use of illegal substances. What is wrong with this thesis statement? This thesis statement is announced. They used a personal pronoun by saying, I will address the following topics. Remember, when we're writing thesis statements, we want to avoid saying things like, I think, I feel, I believe. Instead, we just say it. I know there is another side to your note-taking sheet. We're actually going to do that part together a little bit later on, but for now you are done with your notes for today. Please double check and make sure that you have all of the blanks filled in. If you missed anything, you may want to go back and rewatch and get those things filled in. But other than that, you're done with your notes. Thank you very much for your attention.